Sarah Thompson hurriedly stepped off the subway, her high heels clicking against the pavement as she ran through the busy streets of New York. Her heart was pounding. She was already late for work. "Mr. Jenkins is going to kill me," she muttered, dodging pedestrians. In her rush, she passed a coffee shop and wondered if it was worth taking a few minutes to get a coffee. Her stomach growled, reminding her that she hadn't eaten anything. "I need caffeine," she decided, hurrying inside. "Good morning, Doris." "The usual, please, and hurry, I'm late." Doris, the waitress, smiled understandingly. "No problem, Sarah." She handed her coffee in a paper cup. "Everything will be fine today." "Thanks, Doris," Sarah called, already hurrying off. As she ran down the sidewalk, dodging pedestrians and taking sips of her still steaming coffee, her thoughts were on the conversation she was going to have with her boss. "I need a good excuse." "No, that won't work." "Sir, I'm sorry, but..." Suddenly, something caught her attention. A man, dressed in an elegant suit, seemed to be staggering. He leaned against the wall of a building, his face pale. Sarah stopped, watching him with concern. Other pedestrians passed by him without noticing. "Sir, are you okay?" she asked hesitantly. The man looked at her, confused. "I don't know," he mumbled, before his body gave out. He fell, and Sarah, with quick reflexes, managed to catch him in time to prevent his head from hitting the ground. "Help!" she shouted, looking around. But no one seemed to move to help. "Subscribe to our channel, this is very important to us." Trembling, she picked up her cell phone and dialed 911. "I need an ambulance." A man passed out in the street. The calm voice of the operator answered, "What's the address?" Sarah looked around, trying to get her bearings. 5th Avenue and 23rd, in front of Joe's Cafe. "Okay, the ambulance is on its way. Stay on the line and check if he's breathing." Sarah leaned in to listen to the man's breathing. "Yes, he is, but it's weak and irregular. Try to feel for a pulse." She took his hand, feeling for a pulse. "I think I can feel it, but it's very faint. The ambulance will be here in a few minutes. Stay with him and keep monitoring." Sarah anxiously stood by the man's side, waiting for help to arrive. Sarah squeezed his hand, feeling panic take hold of her. "Please hold on," she whispered. It felt like time had stopped. She couldn't take her eyes off his pale face, praying that he would keep breathing. Slowly, a small crowd of curious onlookers gathered around. "Does anyone know him?" someone asked. Sarah looked around, but no one answered. Finally, she heard the sound of sirens approaching. "Thank God!" Sarah exclaimed in relief, as the ambulance pulled up beside her. 2 paramedics quickly got out of the vehicle with a stretcher. "What do we have here?" one of them asked, crouching down next to the man. "He was walking down the street and passed out," Sarah explained quickly. "His breathing is weak and his pulse is barely felt." "You did well to call for help," the paramedic said as he checked his vital signs. "Jim, get the defibrillator ready. It looks like he's had a heart attack." They quickly loaded the man onto the stretcher and carried him to the ambulance. Sarah hesitantly approached. "Ma'am, are you related to him?" the second paramedic asked. "No, but I can't leave him like this," Sarah whispered. "Can I come with you?" The paramedics looked at each other. "We don't usually allow it, but it's okay, come in. We might need information." Sarah climbed into the ambulance, her heart racing. She watched the paramedics work quickly to care for the patient, hooking him up to machines and administering medication. "Hang in there, sir," she whispered, clenching her fists. "You're going to make it." At the hospital, everything sped up. The man was rushed to the ICU, and Sarah stood in the emergency room, looking around in confusion. "Ma'am, do you have a patient?" a nurse asked. Yes, I need to fill out some paperwork, Sarah replied, approaching the front desk. Are you a relative? The nurse asked, raising an eyebrow. No, I was around when he got sick, Sarah explained. You're a very kind person, the nurse said in amazement. Sarah cringed, embarrassed. I couldn't leave him there. Well, we need an emergency contact on the list. Do you mind giving me your information? Sure, no problem, Sarah replied, dictating her details. After filling out the paperwork, she sank exhausted into a plastic chair in the hallway. The adrenaline had worn off, and she realized how tired she was. She looked at her watch and let out a muffled scream. I'll be 3 hours late for work. She stood up quickly, thinking frantically about what to do. A part of her wanted to stay at the hospital to see how the man was doing, but she soon realized that if she took any longer, she could lose her job. At that moment, a doctor came out of the ICU. Miss Thompson, he asked. It's me. Sarah ran to him. How is he? Stable, the doctor replied, smiling. Actually, the patient suffered a heart attack. If it weren't for your timely help, the situation could have been much worse. You saved his life. Sarah's legs felt light. Thank God, she whispered. The doctor continued, we'll keep monitoring, but the worst is over. Thank you for your concern, Miss Thompson. We miss having people like you here. Sarah smiled, embarrassed. I just did what anyone would do. Unfortunately, not everyone would do that, the doctor replied, shaking his head. You can be proud of yourself. After saying goodbye, Sarah ran out of the hospital and caught a taxi. She realized she didn't have the money for it, but it didn't matter. To the center, please, and as fast as possible, she asked the driver. During the ride, she nervously rubbed the strap of her bag, imagining the scolding she would receive from her boss. Mr. Jenkins was known for his bad temper and did not tolerate delays. When the taxi stopped in front of the office, Sarah took a deep breath and composed herself. I've been through this before, she muttered as she got out of the car. The office was noisy as usual. Her colleagues looked at her in surprise, but no one had the courage to speak up. Sarah. Mr. Jenkins's secretary, Jen, called. Where have you been? The boss is furious. I'll explain everything, Sarah exhaled. Is he in your office? Yes, and you'd better hurry. Good luck, Jen replied. Sarah knocked on the office door. Come in, a gruff voice said. She stepped inside, her legs shaking. Mr. Jenkins was sitting behind his desk, glaring at her. Miss Thompson, he hissed. Would you deign to show yourself? Sure, no problem, Sarah replied, dictating her details. After filling out the paperwork, she sank exhausted into a plastic chair in the hallway. The adrenaline had worn off, and she realized how tired she was. She looked at her watch and let out a muffled scream, I'll be 3 hours late for work. She stood up quickly, thinking frantically about what to do. A part of her wanted to stay at the hospital to see how the man was doing, but she soon realized that if she took any longer, she could lose her job. At that moment, a doctor came out of the ICU. Miss Thompson, he asked. It's me. Sarah ran to him. How is he? Stable, the doctor replied, smiling. Actually, the patient suffered a heart attack. If it weren't for your timely help, the situation could have been much worse. You saved his life. Sarah's legs felt light. Thank God, she whispered. The doctor continued, we'll keep monitoring, but the worst is over. Thank you for your concern, Miss Thompson. We miss having people like you here. Sarah smiled, embarrassed. I just did what anyone would do. Unfortunately, not everyone would do that, the doctor replied, shaking his head. You can be proud of yourself. After saying goodbye, Sarah ran out of the hospital and caught a taxi. She realized she didn't have the money for it, but it didn't matter. "To the center, please," and as fast as possible, she asked the driver. During the ride, she nervously rubbed the strap of her bag, imagining the scolding she would receive from her boss. Mr. Jenkins was known for his bad temper and did not tolerate delays. When the taxi stopped in front of the office, Sarah took a deep breath and composed herself. "I've been through this before," she muttered as she got out of the car. The office was noisy as usual. Her colleagues looked at her in surprise, but no one had the courage to speak up. "Sarah." Mr. Jenkins's secretary, Jen, called. "Where have you been? The boss is furious." "I'll explain everything," Sarah exhaled. "Is he in your office?" "Yes, and you'd better hurry." "Good luck," Jen replied. Sarah knocked on the office door. "Come in," a gruff voice said. She stepped inside, her legs shaking. Mr. Jenkins was sitting behind his desk, glaring at her. "Miss Thompson," he hissed. "Would you deign to show yourself?" "No need," Sarah shook her head. "You know how stubborn he is." "Thank you, Jen." Jen had always been good to her, and the two hugged. "Hold on, honey," Jen whispered. "Things will get better." Sarah packed her things into a cardboard box and left the room. Outside, a light rain was falling, as if nature itself was crying over her failure. "What do I do now?" Sarah muttered as she walked down the sidewalk. She didn't know where to go. She didn't want to go back to her small apartment, where only the rent bill and an empty refrigerator awaited her. Her feet took her toward the hospital. As she approached the reception desk, she could feel her heart pounding. She took a deep breath and gathered her thoughts before speaking to the nurse. "Hello," Sarah began, trying to sound confident. "I brought in a patient with a heart attack this morning. May I ask how he's doing?" The nurse, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, looked up from her computer and smiled. "Of course, dear. What's your last name?" "Thompson. Sarah Thompson." The nurse nodded and began typing on the keyboard. Sarah rubbed her hands nervously as she waited for the answer. "Oh, yes. I see it here," the nurse finally said, but her expression turned serious. "Unfortunately, the news is not good. The patient is still unconscious. The doctors are doing their best, but his condition is serious." Sarah felt her heart tighten with worry. "Oh, no. But he'll be okay, right?" The nurse smiled softly. "There's always hope in medicine, dear. Our doctors are true professionals and will do the best they can." Sarah nodded, trying to hold back tears. "What about his family? Have they been able to contact anyone?" The nurse shook her head. "Not yet, we haven't been able to identify him. The police are working on it, but so far, no luck." "Oh my God," Sarah whispered. "So he's all alone there, no one by his side?" "Unfortunately, yes," the nurse replied empathetically. Sarah thought for a moment, biting her lip, and then looked at the nurse, determined. "Look, I know this is an unusual request, but can I stay with him? I know it's not normally allowed, but he's alone. No one should have to go through this alone." The nurse hesitated, clearly torn between the rules and compassion. "Well, actually, it's against the rules." "Please," Sarah insisted. "I promise I won't get in his way. I want to stay by his side, so he doesn't feel alone." "At least until his family shows up," Sarah said, her voice full of concern. The nurse sighed, but smiled, touched by Sarah's sincerity. "Okay, but not for long, okay? As soon as the doctors arrive, you'll have to leave." Sarah's face lit up. "Of course. Thank you so much, you don't know how much this means to me." "Room 305, the nurse said, pointing toward the elevators. "Third floor, on the left." Sarah thanked him again and ran to the elevators. As she went up, she tried to organize her thoughts. What am I going to say, she thought. Does it matter if he's unconscious? Even so, Sarah felt it was important to be by his side, to keep him company, to make it clear that he wasn't alone. When she entered room 305, she paused for a moment at the door. The man was lying motionless on the bed, surrounded by wires and tubes. His chest rose and fell slowly, almost imperceptibly, while the heart monitor made its typical beeping sound. His pale face and striking features caught Sarah's attention. She approached the bed carefully, trying not to make any noise, although she knew it would hardly disturb him. She sat down on a chair next to him and hesitantly reached out, lightly touching his hand. "Hi," she said quietly, surprised by the insecurity in her own voice. "I don't know if you can hear me, but I'm the girl who called the ambulance. You got sick on the street, remember? I couldn't just leave you there." Sarah was silent, not knowing what else to say. She watched the man's pale face, trying to catch any sign, but all she could hear was the rhythm of the monitors and the silence of the room. "You know, it's been a rough day for me," she continued, with a sad smile. "My boss, well, he's not the most understanding type. This afternoon, he fired me because of my delay. He said I was irresponsible. Just imagine, saving a life being less important than a simple contract." She gave a short, humorless laugh, remembering Jenkins's fury. "He yelled at me, told me I wasn't qualified to work for a serious company. And, you know, I started to think. Are we so stuck in the routine that we forget what really matters?" Sarah sighed, but soon smiled slightly. "But you know what? I don't regret it. Not for a second. Yes, I lost my job, and that scares me. I have no idea how I'm going to pay next month's rent, but you're alive. And that's what matters. I would do it all over again, in a heartbeat." She gently squeezed the man's hand, as if trying to pass on some of her strength to him. "I'm sure you'll recover. And I bet you have people waiting for you, family, friends. They'll be very happy to know you're okay. And I'll be happy to know that I was able to help." Sarah fell silent, listening to the soft sounds of the hospital around her. On the other side of the door, the nurses' voices and footsteps in the hallway mixed with the distant sound of the elevator, while life went on outside. I kept going, regardless of everything, always dreaming of doing something big. Something that would really make a difference. Sarah looked at the motionless man on the bed, and a slight smile appeared on her face. "I was a secretary in a law firm, but every day was the same: paperwork, phone calls, coffee for the boss. I felt like I was just existing, you know? That I wasn't really living. But today, for the first time, I felt like I did something that was truly worthwhile." She sighed, looking at the sleeping man. "Maybe this is a sign. Maybe it's time to change something in my life. I've always wanted to help people, but I didn't think I had the right qualifications, the ideal training. Now, I see that sometimes, just the fact of not ignoring someone and reaching out to them makes all the difference." She looked out the window, watching the sunset tint the sky orange. "Maybe I should think about something like social work or even volunteering. My mother always said that every challenge is an opportunity for growth. Maybe losing your job isn't the end, but the beginning of something new." Sarah turned back to the man, her eyes now shining with new determination. "Look, not only did you receive help, but you ended up helping me too. Maybe our meeting changed my life for the better. It's funny, isn't it? How everything in the world is connected in some way." She continued to talk about her hopes for the future, how important it was to help others, not knowing if the man could hear her. But in her heart, she hoped that her voice and presence would somehow comfort him. "My grandmother always said, kindness is a language the deaf can hear and the blind can see. I didn't quite understand that before, but now I think I'm beginning to understand." Sarah laughed softly, reflecting on how much that moment had taught her. Later, a nurse appeared at the door, with a kind smile. "Miss Thompson, unfortunately, visiting hours are over." Sarah, although disappointed, nodded. "I understand. Thank you so much for letting me stay." She stood up and, before leaving, took the man's hand once more. "I'll be back tomorrow, I promise. Have faith, you'll get better. And thank you, for reminding me of what's really important in life." As she left the room, Sarah took one last look at the man in the bed. "See you tomorrow," she whispered softly. In the hallway, she stopped for a moment, feeling a mix of emotions, sadness at having lost her job, but at the same time, a new and unexpected determination. "How are you feeling?" the nurse asked, noticing the expression on Sarah's face. "I don't know yet," Sarah replied. "But I think it will get better." "It has to get better." The nurse smiled tenderly. "Your faith is stronger than you think. Come back tomorrow. Talking to him can help more than you think, even if it seems like he can't hear." Sarah nodded, with a small smile. "I'll definitely be here. Thank you for everything." And with that, she left the hospital, feeling that something deep inside her had changed. Sarah left the hospital with a strange sense of calm, despite having lost her job and being uncertain about her future. She knew she had done the right thing, and that gave her the strength to face whatever came her way. The next morning, she returned to her old office with a heavy heart. As she rode up the elevator, her nervous fingers fiddled with the strap of her purse. "How are you, Jen?" Sarah greeted Mr. Jenkins's secretary with a weak smile. "I've been better," Jen replied sympathetically. "I'm sorry, Sarah. Mr. Jenkins was very hard on you. Maybe I can help in some way." Sarah shook her head with a grateful smile. "Thank you, Jen." She gathered up her belongings and took one last look at her old workspace. So many memories, and now it was all gone. When she left, she headed straight to a coffee shop with Wi-Fi, determined to start looking for a new job. For hours, she sent out resumes, but the responses she received were disappointing. "Unfortunately, your experience does not meet our requirements. We do not have any suitable openings at this time. We have decided to move forward with another candidate." Sarah felt tiredness taking over. Looking at her calendar, she noticed that there were only 3 weeks left until her next rent payment. Sighing, she muttered to herself, "Okay, Sarah. Time to act. You can do it. You have to." She turned on her computer and went back to browsing through job listings. Her eyes quickly scanned the job listings. "This won't do. Too far away. Oh, that sounds interesting." As she read the descriptions, she tried to convey enthusiasm in the cover letters she wrote. "Dear Sirs, I am confident that my experience," she muttered as she typed, trying not to sound too formal but also professional. Every day, Sarah forced herself to wake up at 6 a.m., even when fatigue and frustration tried to make her stay in bed. She looked in the mirror and said, "Get up, sleepyhead. New day, new opportunities." She ate a quick breakfast while searching for new job openings on her phone. Suddenly, something caught her eye. Administrative assistant at a marketing company. That's something I can do. Wasting no time, she dialed the number on the ad. "Good morning, I'm calling about the position for an administrative assistant," she said, trying to sound confident. "Sure," a female voice answered on the other end of the line. "Can you come in today at 2 for an interview?" "Sure," Sarah replied, feeling a surge of hope. "Thank you so much." She hung up the phone, raised her fist in a gesture of victory, and smiled. First interview of the day. "Come on, Sarah, you can do it." Sarah nervously walked into the marketing company's office, tightly gripping the strap of her purse as she waited for her turn. When she was finally called, a middle-aged woman smiled at her. "Miss Thompson, I'm Carol Johnson, the Director of Human Resources. You may take a seat. Sarah took a deep breath and began to talk about her experience and skills, trying to convey all her enthusiasm and eagerness to learn. Impressive, Miss Thompson, Carol nodded. But unfortunately, we need someone with specific experience in the marketing area. Sarah felt hope slipping through her fingers, but she didn't give up. I'm a fast learner, she exclaimed. Give me a chance, and I'll prove myself. I'm willing to work extra hours and learn about marketing in my spare time. Carol smiled, but shook her head. You seem very motivated, but unfortunately, we don't have time to train you. If anything changes, we'll be in touch. As she left the office, Sarah leaned against the wall for a moment, feeling frustration and tears threatening to come. No, you can't give up, she whispered to herself. This is just the first interview. There will be others. And indeed, that day, she had 2 more interviews, but the responses were the same, polite refusals and vague promises to call if anything changes. Despite her disappointment, Sarah didn't forget her promise to visit the patient in the hospital. As she entered room 305, the tension of the day began to dissipate. Hi, he said quietly, sitting down next to the bed. I'm here again. I've had 3 interviews today, but so far, no luck. But I'm not giving up. She took the man's hand, feeling a comforting strength in that simple gesture. You know, the hiring manager said I seem very motivated. That's something, right? Maybe I'll have better luck next time. Sarah was silent for a moment, staring at the man's still face. Sometimes I think I'm talking to myself, she laughed softly. But deep down, I know you hear me. I believe you'll get better. We're both struggling right now, in different ways, but we'll get through this. She told him about her attempts to find a job, the hardships and the small victories. Talking to this stranger was surprisingly easy. And you know what's funny, she said, smiling. These visits help me remember why I started all this, to help someone. It gives me the strength to keep looking for a job. As she left the room, Sarah bumped into the nurse who was already starting to look familiar. How are you today, honey? The nurse asked. It's been a tough day, Sarah sighed. 3 interviews, 3 rejections. But I'm trying to keep the faith. The nurse nodded, with an understanding look. You're amazing, Sarah. You come here every day, despite your own problems. Don't lose faith. Thank you. Sarah smiled, feeling a little better with those words. When she got home, she sat at the kitchen table, spreading out the bills and feeling the weight of her responsibilities. With the bills in front of her, Sarah sighed deeply. Let's see, she murmured, quickly counting what was left of the money. If I save enough, maybe it'll last another 15 days. She shook her head, pushing away the dark thoughts. No, I'll do it. It has to work out. With renewed determination, she opened her laptop and dove into her job search. She reviewed resumes, wrote cover letters, and ignored her tiredness, even though the clock was already past midnight. This one sounds interesting. Editor's assistant. She muttered to herself, sending her resume. After finally turning off the computer, already in bed and in the dark, her mind was still racing. She thought about the man in the hospital, about the uncertain future of both of them. Please, she whispered, not knowing who she was addressing her words to fate, to God, or just to the universe. May tomorrow be better. But the days passed and, despite her efforts, nothing improved. Until one night, as she sat in the kitchen and counted her last savings, Sarah realized she could no longer postpone the inevitable. So, that's it, she whispered, looking at the numbers on the notepad, her voice trembling. There was no way out. She picked up the phone and dialed the owner's number. After a few beeps, a familiar voice answered. Hello, it's Mr. Green. Hello, Mr. Green, Sarah said, trying to remain calm. I'm Sarah Thompson. Ah, Mississippi Thompson. How can I help you? Sarah took a deep breath, trying to control her emotions. I wanted to let you know that I won't be able to pay the next rent. I'll have to move. There was a pause on the other end. Are you sure? Maybe we can find a solution. No, Mr. Green, but thank you for the offer. She shook her head, even though she knew he couldn't see her. I really appreciate your understanding, but I have no choice. I lost my job and couldn't find another one. I'll have to move back in with my parents. I'm sorry about that, Ms. Thompson. You've been a great tenant. Thank you, she replied in a whisper. I can get the paperwork ready and move out of the apartment within a week. After hanging up, Sarah stood there for a long time, staring into space, trying to absorb what was happening. Her dream of living in New York was coming to an end. The next day, she went to the hospital as usual. But when she entered room 305, she felt a lump in her throat. He approached slowly and sat down beside the bed. Hi. I'm here again, she began, trying to keep her voice steady. But today, I came to say goodbye. She took the man's hand, as she had done every day for the past few weeks. I really wanted to get a job and stay here, but it didn't work out. She murmured, looking at him. I don't have any more money to keep trying. I'll have to leave. She felt her eyes burn, but she forced herself to maintain her composure. After so many days there, even though he had never answered, she felt that this stranger had become a silent confidant, someone who, somehow, gave her the strength to carry on. I just wanted to say thank you. I hope you get better. I really do. And she stood there, in silence, holding the man's hand for a moment longer, not knowing when, or if, she would see him again. Sarah took a deep breath, trying to control her emotions as she thought about everything she was leaving behind. I'm going back to my hometown, to my parents' house, she said quietly, as she held the unconscious man's hand. She was silent for a moment, feeling the weight of the farewell. I'll miss you. It's strange, we don't even know each other well, but these visits have become so important to me. She squeezed his hand a little tighter. You helped me not give up, even when things were really hard. Sarah paused, fighting back tears. I have faith that you'll recover. I'm sure you will. Maybe one day you'll wake up and tell the nurses about the strange girl who came to see you every day. She smiled, her voice breaking. I hope you remember me with a smile. With tears streaming down her cheeks, Sarah stood up. Goodbye, and thank you for everything. She took one last look at the man's still face before leaving, closing the door behind her. The room was silent, but without her seeing it, his hand moved slightly in response to her words. In the days that followed, Sarah spent her time packing her things into boxes, reliving memories with each item she packed. Remember this mug, she muttered to herself, carefully wrapping the item in newspaper. It was on my first day of work. I was so excited. She found an old photo of her and her colleagues from a company party. I wonder how Jen is doing. I hope she's okay. Sarah continued packing her life into boxes, trying not to think too much about what she was leaving behind, books, clothes, mementos, all meticulously packed away. The night before she left, she sat on the windowsill, looking out at the lights of New York. Goodbye, city of my dreams, she whispered. Thank you for all the lessons, the ups and downs. Maybe one day I'll be back. Until then, it's time to start a new chapter. With those words, she closed the window and went back to her final preparations. On the morning of her departure, the sky was overcast, as if New York itself was sad to see her go. Sarah took one last look at her empty apartment, sighed, and began loading the boxes into her rental car. I guess that's it, she muttered, closing the trunk. Goodbye, big city. Suddenly, she heard quick footsteps approaching. She turned around and saw a man running towards her with a bouquet of flowers. Her heart raced. She recognized him. It was the man from the hospital. "Sarah," he shouted, stopping in front of her, panting. "Thank God I got there in time." Are you awake?" Sarah whispered, unable to believe what she was seeing. "But how? How did you find me?" The man smiled, handing her the bouquet. "I heard everything you said to me while you were in a coma. Every word. And when I woke up, the first thing I did was look for you." Sarah took the flowers, feeling tears fill her eyes. They looked at each other, not knowing what to say. The silence was broken by him, with a serious look. "Promise me you won't leave," he asked, as he took an envelope from his suit pocket. "Here are your work documents and the lease for your new apartment. Please stay in New York." Sarah looked at the envelope in surprise, then at him. "But why? You don't even know me well." "Yes, I know you," he replied, now in a soft tone. "I know you are a kind person, who helps even strangers. I know that, even when everything seems lost, you don't give up. And that's someone like that who I want by my side." Sarah couldn't take it anymore and burst into tears, hugging the man. "I'm so glad you're okay," she whispered, her voice breaking. He hugged her back, and for a moment, they stood there, in the middle of the sidewalk, ignoring the curious looks of the people passing by. When Sarah calmed down a little, he smiled. "Shall we see your new apartment?" he asked. She nodded, still stunned by everything that had happened. Quickly, he led her to the car, a luxurious black sedan that appeared on the street. "By the way, I haven't introduced myself yet. My name is James Harrington." "Harrington?" Sarah's mouth dropped open. "Like Harrington Industries?" He nodded with a slight smile. "Exactly. I'm the CEO." Sarah fell silent, surprised. Harrington Industries was one of the largest technology companies in the country. They soon arrived at their new apartment, which was a luxurious suite overlooking Central Park. James led her through the place, showing her the huge living room, the modern kitchen, and a bedroom the size of her old apartment. "This is too much for me," Sarah said, her voice almost hoarse. "I can't take it." "Yes, you can," James interrupted softly. "Consider this a thank you for saving my life." They sat in the living room, and James began to tell his story. "Look, Sarah, I'm an orphan. I have no family who could look for me. And since I'm often traveling for work, no one noticed my absence for so long. They thought I was on some secret project." Sarah listened intently as James continued. "When I woke up and realized how much time had passed, I was in shock. But my first thought was you. Through all this chaos, your voice, your stories, helped me come back." "I'm glad I could help," Sarah said, excited. "You've done so much more," James replied seriously. "And now I want to offer you a job. I need a personal assistant, someone I can trust completely. Someone like you." Sarah was surprised. "But I don't have experience with something this big." James smiled. "But you have something that money can't buy, honesty and compassion." She took a deep breath, trying to process everything. I don't know what to say." "Say yes," James insisted, with a smile. Sarah looked at him, still in disbelief, and finally said, "Yes." The next few weeks passed quickly, with Sarah adapting to her new life and James by her side, ever grateful that she had completely changed the course of their lives. Sarah threw herself headfirst into the work, helping James regain control of the company. She learned quickly, getting the hang of the business world as she went. James was not only a brilliant businessman, but also a great teacher. He patiently explained the most complex details and always took the time to answer her questions. "You're doing better than I expected," James commented one day after Sarah presented an excellent proposal to investors. Sarah was embarrassed by the compliment. "I have a good teacher," she replied with a shy smile. Their eyes met for a brief moment. Little by little, something beyond the professional relationship began to grow between them. Sarah found herself admiring James, especially when he would look thoughtfully out the window. He, in turn, would subtly touch her arm during conversations, a gesture that began to happen more frequently. One night, after working late on an important project, they decided to order dinner at the office. Tired but satisfied with their progress, they sat on the couch to eat and talk. "You know, Sarah," James said suddenly, putting his plate aside, "I've never believed in fate. But now, I think our meeting was destined." Sarah felt her heart race. "What do you mean by that?" she asked, her voice low. James took her hand, looking deeply into her eyes. "You changed my life. Not only did you save me, but you showed me that there is still kindness and selflessness in the world. You became an essential part of my life." Sarah held her breath, feeling the weight of the words. Before she could respond, James gently pulled her closer and touched his lips to hers. The kiss was hesitant, like a silent question. She responded, letting the heat spread through her body. When they finally broke apart, James smiled. "I fell in love with you, Sarah. For your voice, your kindness, your strength. I want to be by your side, not only at work, but in life." Tears of joy began to fill Sarah's eyes. "I love you too," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You gave me back my faith in miracles." They kissed again, and in that moment, they both knew that their lives would never be the same again. They knew they would still face challenges and trials, but now they were sure that, together, they could overcome anything. Subscribe to our channel. This is very important so that we can bring you more incredible love stories.